Okay, welcome to another episode of VIVA. I am your host, Bonnie, and today we are speaking with a very special guest here in Berlin.
Hi, I am not a host. My name is Mia Amani Harrison. And you didn't hear that extra laugh. That was me, internally.
Yes, okay.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Yes, we're super happy to have you on the podcast today to talk about all things related to art, Black Lives Matter movement, and other sort of artistic expressions in pertaining to Black culture. So I would just sort of like to ask if you could introduce yourself for us.
Yeah, I can.
You know, how long have you been in Berlin? What is your field of work? What are your interests, etc.?
Okay, so I will start with how long I've been in Berlin. I've been here for about 2 beautiful years. I've been going back and forth actually since 2015. And part of my even being pulled to Berlin was the first time I came and didn't just go to Berghain, but like spent time here, was the first time I felt like I could be fully in my Blackness and in my queerness and not have to worry or check those things. I'm from Seattle, Washington, which is a pretty liberal city. Like, I'm not going to knock them or charge them to the game, but I still just didn't feel like I could fully be me. And maybe part of it is because, you know, when you're, even if you love the city you're from, you're so comfortable there, right? And so maybe sometimes you don't want to fully express yourselves because of the pressures of other people expecting you to present a certain way or to act a certain way. And even though, you know, I have friends there who are really accepting of who I am and how I walk through the earth, it's just when I came to Berlin, there's a different energy. It's slightly chaotic, very fun, and very almost cosmic. I just felt an energy and a surge, so I was like, I need to find a way to make it here. And in 2017, I was actually in Rome doing a creative writing residency, actually a program through the University of Washington. It was amazing. And I ended up meeting my partner there, and he was living in Berlin. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to pop over there after my program's done. So I popped over, spent a few months, and again, I just felt that energy and that connection here. On top of it, it was, it was June, and I had finished my program. I came to Berlin June 2nd. And I remember being here and just being like, okay, I feel like I could maybe put my roots down. Like, maybe there's something I could do here. And right after I was getting into that feeling of comfort, a Black woman was murdered in Seattle in her house by the police. Seattle is not a violent city. So this was a lot for me. And I'm sorry, I should have given a trigger warning. But that was a reality for me, is that I was reading tons of deaths of Black women happening in the States. I was here. I felt like my fullest self in the first time in my life here, but I also felt my heart completely breaking for what was happening in the States. So there was this moment of tension for me. At this moment in my life, I did not consider myself to be an artist or an activist. I was just a writer trying to figure it out. But the minute I came back to Seattle, I was over it. I was tired. I was literally tired. It's like, I cannot keep watching people who look like me, people who have lived my existence, and the silence of trans Black women who are being murdered. And no one do anything about it. And, you know, there were kikis and parties and stuff happening in Seattle. And, of course, there were community events that were happening with Black folks. But it wasn't, for me, proactive enough. I was like, I'm ready to do something about this. I can't just keep watching this. And so that is what kind of forced me to do something. I remember being in a room with my friends at my best friend's house, and I was like, I'm tired of us talking about this, but we never come together to address it. And maybe I sounded like I was nagging, or maybe I sounded like I was being too critical. And a friend said, well, why don't you do something about it? And I was like, oh, can I curse? Bitch, I will. I will do something about this. And you watch me, because I'm very much into, if you say I can't do something, I will.
It's like motivation.
I will definitely show you. And I will do it with care, and I'll do it with love, and I'll do it in a way that, like, at least for me, it wasn't just for me. When I started my artworks, it was a way for me to heal the trauma of, you know, the 5-year-old me, the 10-year-old me, the 15-year-old me, the 25-year-old me, to date myself. And also, like, the community, also the nation. I wanted to think of ways to reimagine or dream a new way of existence. And that's what caused me to become an artist. I was like, I'm tired of seeing this. I'm not the one who's going to march on the streets, because I have PTSD when it comes to that. Like, I have moments where I'm like, oh, I cannot be in big crowds. So how can I activate myself using the tool sets that I have and the skills that I have? I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not, right? I can be active in my unactivity. And so that's when I was like, okay, I want to create spaces of rest, spaces of peace, spaces of beauty, where that 5-year-old me would feel safe. And where the other 5-year-old versions of my best friends could come and just be and share their dreams. And so the first project was called Remember, with the REM in brackets, because it was about, can we use dreams as sites for liberation, to expand upon Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Had a Dream speech.
Right.
So if he had the dream and the expectation and it hasn't been realized yet, then we should all go back to sleep and find it.
Yeah.
And that was the whole intention. So from that point on, 2018 was when I first did it in Seattle, and 2019 was when I did a dream project here on my anniversary in Berlin at Savvy Contemporary, and I just keep dreaming, and that's all that I want to do and care to do. Sorry, that was a lot.
That's wonderful, though. I'm very curious about your projects. So, because it seems very much like a dreamscape in order to find and liberate yourself through in a very sort of in an actively passive way, right?
Yeah.
Because you're dreaming. And so I'm wondering, how do you create these spaces within your art as reflections of, your 5-year-old self, your 2-year-old self, trying to find these spaces that you couldn't find, sort of in the past.
So with Remember, when I was kind of coming up with the, what's the best word for this? The interior design, I guess. Because my thing is, how can we externalize an experience to the 5 senses?
Okay.
So if someone doesn't understand the words that I'm saying, they can still engage with the textual reality, right? And so I was really interested in this way of how can you create a space that is also representative of a time capsule.
Okay.
So if the I Have a Dream speech was made in the 60s,
right,
how do I create a space that emulates the 60s?
Right.
And how do I create a space that emulates the 60s? Glamour, beauty, dreaminess that also could involve blackness and center blackness and center queerness at the same time. Because, I was really interested in Brigitte Bardot and other, Italian actresses and the glamour and the beauty. And there's this film called Cleo from 5 to 7.
Okay.
Gorgeous film if anyone has a chance to see it.
Good to know.
She is an actress in the film that is diagnosed with death. So she goes to a tarot reader and is told she is going to die soon. Okay. And the whole film is about her coming to that space. But there's a scene where she's in her boudoir and it's beautiful. She's in this silk gown or maybe silk or chiffon, and she's just gliding around the place. It's like, why can't we be there? Why can't we be there? Why can't we have that moment of elation? She has been told she's going to die. Right. She's living a more glamorous life than we have lived. So I was like, I want to give us a place and a space where we could do that and dream and be light. And so for me, it really came down to colors. So how do you emulate something dreamy and cosmic? So it was a lot of magentas and blues and soft pinks and soft blues. And I literally took domestic spaces and made them public. So houses, alternative queer spaces, almost like a Vega or like a shared housing project in Seattle. And I converted them into dreamscapes. And so I activated places that held particular emotions for me. And one is Indian Summer, which is actually it's a Black indigenous owned vintage shop. And in the back, there's a whole, almost apartment. Oh, wow. And so Adria Garcia is the owner and operator of the space. She's also an artist, or they're also an artist. And they invited me to occupy that space and to invite the community in. Because my thing is with this project, it ran on 45 minutes, which is the cycle of REM sleep. Okay. And there were 15-minute intervals, so people were able to come in. But it was limited how many people could be in the space at a time. And it was all Black, all trans, all queer. And most of these folks, if they didn't know each other directly, we were all in a circuit together. So the energy was very much upheld. And in that space, with the help of Adria and loaning the space and also the material, we covered the entire floor in soft material. So you could lay on almost any surface. We had beautiful netting, lighting coming from above. So it really did feel like you were in this dream. Everything kind of flowed together, even the fabrics. So I'm really interested in how do you externalize a feeling just through the textiles that you use or like how you implement the space. And to go beyond that, how do you create a soundscape that also emulates this?
Right.
And so we used, of course, music like Minnie Riperton's Only When I'm Dreaming and other songs, like the Blackbirds also have a song, Dreaming of You, incorporating those into the sounds of Neptune and Pluto, like planets that are associated with sleep and dreaming. And I used tuning forks that were attuned to these planets as well. So it was like a full experience where you also were pulled into another space or place. And then I had a clearing spray that was also used to kind of ground the energy of everyone there and set an intention as we would go into the cycle. So as the 45 minutes would come to a close, it's like you went through a whole section of dreaming together. And because this place was also kind of like an apartment, there was a bathtub where I did sound baths and dream journeying. So I made a bed in the bathtub and people would lay in it. And I would play the tuning forks of Neptune and Pluto at the same time in order to bring down those energies. And they would tell me about the dream that they would like to materialize. And at the end, I would give them a crystal for them to plant this dream in. So it was like a full, like, how do you go even deeper into the dream, like a little Inception situation? It's like, how can we have the shared dream, but then how can you also, how can I hold space for your dreams?
I see.
And guide you through a place where, we're daydreaming the reality you want to create, but it feels real. So you have a witness there to really be observant of what you're saying, but also in a year, because I would catch up with people, a year later, I also am there to be like, oh, wow, look at what you've done. You really did make it happen. And so that's why it was intimate, because I wanted to have these these interpersonal connections with people. And with every situation, it was different because it was always responding to space. So as I said, I also did it in like this queer veggie, where I used to party. Like, that was where everybody would party underage. And I'm not going to say the name of the place because I don't want anyone to get in trouble. But this was the place where you would, literally just shake your ass and show your ass and do your thing without anyone worrying about it. Like, I never had to worry about someone hitting on me or someone trying to attack my blackness, my feminist, whatever. It was a space where everyone could occupy and tons of different personalities, tons of different external expressions, but everyone showed up in their looks that were them. So I wanted to activate that space for healing because it had shown me so much in my past. So we transformed the bottom portion of the space as people were living in there. They
were still living there.
They were still living there. And different, like they have different, I don't want to say like cubbies, but there were different areas of the house that you could occupy. Like it was very lofty. But this ground floor, they allowed us to totally transform and also create that dreamscape. And people came in. It was part of a festival called Festival. And there were curators there, artists there, community members there, and they all came in at one time, and I did a group guided meditation with everyone where we were able to release traumas, individual traumas, but collectively. And so you didn't have to externalize or say what was going on, but it was very much focused on finding it in the body and expressing ways to get it out through this dreamscape and leaving it there. Like, you don't have to take it with you afterwards. Leave it there and then allow yourself to dream beyond it.
I see.
And so that was really fun. I don't want to go through each of the stages of this project, but it was done in different spaces, and I was able to connect with different groups because of this, and because of the spaces and the project being always responsive to space, much like us when we sleep, right? If you fall asleep and your neighbor's playing rock music, you might have a dream you went to a rock concert, right?
I see.
And so with the dreamscapes that I created, they were always in dialogue with the spaces they were in. For instance, I did one piece at the Sam Remix 10-year anniversary, which is the Seattle Art Museum's lab that they do. And I was invited by Adria, the same person who owned the shop. And I was able to do this dream installation in there, but instead of inviting people in, I slept during the whole party. And that was my performance. Like, I'm going to sleep, I'm going to try to take an energy and see what comes up. And kind of be like anti of this whole like we're celebrating through drinking and through partying, but how can we also celebrate in the sense of trying to reimagine this whole situation and reimagine institutions, but through a soft way. Like, I'm literally just laying there beautiful asleep. Yeah. So that's always been my thing, is how can we activate space beyond the physical reality of it and bring in that energy, but also take it to the next level.
I see.
Yeah.
So it definitely also makes me think of like a super, how do I express this? A hyper multidisciplinary, like atelier, right? Because it's sort of this, it's like a very sort of active way to retrospectively release things from your past and sort of just leave it there. And I'm very curious as to how that, as to how, when you brought that to Berlin, how was it received by, like different communities here? Because you also created this space for different communities back in the US. And so I'm wondering, because Berlin is also one of these cities that's like, you can find any and every community in Berlin, and there are some overlaps with a few, and not so much some overlaps with a few, but it exists here. Yeah. So having that sort of at the background of your artistic practice, how do you think it was received here?
Here, I actually did a different project.
A different one
that was still related to dreams.
Still related to dreams.
So here, I felt like just kidding. We can edit that out. I still wanted to do the project. I just didn't feel like when I moved, it made sense to come in and say, okay, now I'm going to occupy space where I'm not connected to the history, the people, or anything. And so instead, I wanted to continue getting to know the environment, getting to build my community. And I was more passive. I was more about trying to get to learn and understand who people are, how the community operates, and still dream. So instead of doing the Remember project, I actually created another project in response. So I had a dream. I was in Salvador, in Bahia, in Brazil, for like a month, and I had a really strong dream when I got back to Seattle. And that dream always stuck with me. I feel like we all have these grand dreams, these 1 to 5 dreams that you never forget, and they feel so real and they stick with you, even if they're very absurd. You just have that one dream, like, there was this one time. So with this dream, it just felt so real. It almost felt like a recovery of a past memory, if you will.
Recovery of a past.
Yeah, so in the dream, just to give the short part of it, I was enslaved with 3 other women, and we were looking onto a colonial house where they were celebrating, and we were so enraged. And we knew we could have done something. We could have burnt the house down. We could have, sacked that, whatever. But instead, we decided to return to the earth. So through telepathy, we spoke to each other and said, it's time for the revolution, but the revolution is actually in going back into the earth. And we vibrated and entered the ground.
Oh, wow.
And I remember...
So you quite literally descended.
We literally went into the earth.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the last thing I remember is the soil coming up right before my eyes, and then I woke up.
I see. Wow.
And so I had this dream, and I was really interested in the blurring of science and art. So how can we use dreams as a way to predict something, or also use dreams as a way to understand a community or a trauma that a community has endured. And so part of what I want to do with this project, it's called How to Return to the Earth When It Turned Its Back on You. And I wanted to continue the dream. I was really interested in what would have happened if I actually went all the way down. And what would happen if I tried to externalize this dream? How would I create it? What would I use? And how can soil itself be a archival material? So if our ancestors, or anyone's ancestors, passed in a specific geographical location, if you put your hands into that dirt, would you be able to access their memory? So I was really interested in these ideas, and so I created an installation with Savvy Contemporary where I made kind of a model of the dream using a white dollhouse. And a giant bathtub, because I'm really into these ideas of sound baths, right? And the bathtub being a representation of the vessel of the body as well. and soil also being a representation of something that can cleanse, not just water. And so I did basically these rituals where I tried to return to the dream and would induce a trance-like state in order to continue it through visioning and that type of thing. And so it was about dreams, but in a very different sense. And it wasn't necessarily about my particular trauma. Right. It was like, oh, what would it look like if I tried to access this dream through connecting to the soil? If I tried to access ancestral memory through connecting to the land.
And so I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm really curious as to what types of rituals you sort of underwent in order to gain access or sort of to reignite or ignite these feelings and these emotions.
Yeah, so for me, I didn't really look up. I did research on different dreaming communities, of course, like dream walking and Aboriginal communities and so forth. But I already have ritual as part of my personal practice, so I wanted to extend beyond that and listen to my body and see, okay, well, what works for me? And sound is huge for me. Right. And so I'm very much into different frequencies and how they connect to the body. And so for this ritual, every day leading up to my performance, which I did in the forest by our house, is that I would meditate on the frequency for the third eye. Okay. As my body was like immersed in soil. And did that every day leading up to the performance, where I would hum the frequency in order to feel it in my whole body. And I induced my body to shake in the same way that it did in the dream to hopefully recreate that energy. And so, I did that and then just cleared my mind and just allowed whatever to come, whatever that means. And so, I that was my process in saying, okay, like this frequency means this to me, this aspect or chakra in my body, meridian in my body means this to me. So if I were trying to activate it, this would be the way that I activate it. And for me, I think the body is such a great instrument and vehicle and vessel. So how could I animate my physical body in order to bring forth that change? And for me, it was getting to like a vibration in my own body, which also creates a frequency and a sound. So it was really just me kind of playing with different aspects and rituals, and also just listening to my intuition and what worked for me. And so that's what I did. And for Savvy, I also did that performance during the opening in front of the installation, because I was wondering what would it be like to induce this dreamlight state in front of the externalized version of my dream. Would that change versus being in the forest versus being in the bathtub? So I'm really into experiments and like how can we use our embodied knowledge matched with these other ritualistic or alternative methods of gaining information.
Okay, and so can you explain a bit for people who may not know, because I know I don't know.
I might not either.
I think you will. But what is embodied knowledge? What is this? Is this knowledge that we sort of already inherently have that we don't know we have? Or is it something that has to be sort of brought out by someone like a teacher or some other source?
I think, and I don't want to speak for everybody, this is not a Webster or an Oxford Dictionary definition of embodied knowledge. Noun. For me, embodied knowledge can activate in different ways, right? So part of it is a mannerism or connection to something. So my mother passed before I was 10. And so I was only socialized with her for a very brief period of my life. But there's still aspects of me, and again, I did not know my mother as an adult, that come up that my family members are like, oh, that's something that Sandra would say, or that's something that Sandra would do. Or just a connection to herbs. Like I was always into making tinctures as a child. Just not, people are playing Barbies, I'm in the garden, picking different herbs, literally making tinctures under heat. Like it was very...
So you've always, in a lot of ways, been very experimental. Just
always,
by nature.
Just by nature. And luckily I had parents who were open to allowing me to do these things. I don't even know if they knew I was doing all this, but I was interested in herbs books. And there was this like Wiccan bookstore called, what was it called? Raven's World. and it had a giant raven with a gold globe in its mouth above the store. And I would go there and I would ask my dad to buy me witch books, like spell books.
Yeah.
That was what I was a Cinderella can sit over here. I went to witch books and I went to cast spells, and I was really interested in that. And I don't know why, but it was very much like, how do you put things together? Alchemy. I'm still interested in alchemy. Right. And my projects are all meant to alchemize trauma. Like, how do we move the trauma through our body in order for it to no longer exist in this form anymore? How can we alchemize trauma into joy or into pleasure or into whatever? And so for me, that to go back, that embodied knowledge could be activating a genetic lineage or a genetic knowledge that someone's passed down. It might be that you're really good at cooking and you use the same spices that your great-grandmother would, but you never knew her, that kind of thing. It also could be activating maybe certain talents or disciplines from your family. Like finding out, oh, the great-grandmother was an artist. She was a seamstress. And then you've always been the one to pick up and just sew and mend things, but no one in the family ever told you, So I'm really interested in these through lines. And again, like, they might not be scientifically provable, but they still exist. Or at least that's how I feel.
I mean, it's really interesting because in my life, I would sort of I would call it the spirit, you know? And so just giving language to the things that we haven't been sort of taught in a traditional way of education. And our families, you know, sort of passively cultivated within us because your father taking you to Wiccan bookstore, you know what I mean?
That's like, I have to go.
I mean, that's like very much a very good example of, you know, your parents were just like very passively cultivating this, you know, this interest, this spirit. But transitioning sort of to the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And this as a obvious trauma for many people. I'm very curious as to how, for artists, how they can sort of use, or not necessarily use this experience because it's sort of at the expense of other people's trauma, but sort of take this trauma, this collective trauma, in a lot of ways global trauma, because we're talking about Black bodies within the diaspora, within the African diaspora, and it's not only an American-centric problem. But I'm curious as to how artists can sort of use this trauma, or how you would sort of, in a lot of ways, use this trauma to express or to sort of create a path for liberation for the Black body and the Black female body, etc.
For me, again, I don't want to speak on artists because everyone has their own reason for why they create art. Maybe someone just wants to, they want to paint a flower and have it be connected to Blackness, and I think that's also okay. It's okay, But for me, I get the most activated and stimulated when I see that there's a potential of envisioning a new way of doing something and activating like a dreamlike state or activating the wonderment. Like when you're a child and you're just, everything's wonderful, everything's miraculous, every little thing, you know? So how do you activate that in people? Because I think even throughout the diaspora, how Blackness has been cultivated, it's always in an active way. Like we actively have to protest, we actively have to fight for our rights, and it's always the grind of the day to just exist and to be seen as a living, breathing being amongst other living, breathing beings. And for me, I'm really interested in how can we use art as a way to subvert that and look at Black bodies as not just being bodies of production, but bodies of rest, bodies of restoration, bodies of dreaming, bodies of creating other ways of existing or coexisting. And so I'm interested in that. It doesn't mean that everyone has to respond to Black Lives Matter the same way. I mean, there's clearly political artists who are going to engage with it in very specific manners. But for me, I'm interested in how can we create restorative practices that allow us to imagine the next existence, right? So say we all get the rights that we want. Say we all get liberated. We wake up tomorrow and we're liberated. You're going to get paid the same as Bob Williams.
Yeah.
Trans women are able to walk the streets with whoever and not be assaulted or threatened.
Redlining.
What does that world look like? Yeah. What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What do these new institutions or the collapsing of these institutions, what will that mean, and how will we go about day-to-day life? I'm really interested in that. And not just thinking about the present moment and how it exists, but the future and the potentialities of the future. So it doesn't even have to be in the present existence that we live in now. Like, it could be very surrealistic. It could be on maybe not a different planet, because we might create the same colonialist patterns. Yeah. But how could we reimagine a way of being and becoming? So that's where I stand in my art. It's like, let's get out of the conditions of the material world that we live in and just think of what it would look like in a completely different sense. Play, joy, engaging with reality outside of those confines.
Okay. So, so like a sort of, in a lot of ways, not retrospective sort of dreamscape, but one that's a bit more sort of intentional. That's a sort of future dreamscape in some ways.
But like when you daydream, you're in the present, but you're imagining a future, right? So collapsing those time models as well and being more speculative, like, how could this be? What could this feel like? And just engaging with that feeling, engaging with that joy, engaging with that play. Because I don't think we get to play as much as adults in general, across races, but especially as Black people, especially Black youth. I think of Black youth all the time because I'm like, you're already told to grow up so quickly. The fact that you have to be conditioned on how to engage with the world around you, instead of just looking at a tree and saying, oh, it has stories to tell me. You can't. You don't have that time to just dream, for lack of better words. And so how do we allow people to dream again and give them space to dream? And that comes to, restless resistance movements. Black Power Naps does this. There's also the Nap Ministry that does this. There's different artists who are doing this. So I'm not trying to co-opt or co-sign anything. I'm just saying it's interesting that a lot of different groups are reimagining the ways that we could build restorative practices and change the paradigm of which our days as Black people carry on. Like, do we need to think of the 9 to 5 work life? Could we imagine actually living lives where we got our 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night? Like, can we prioritize rest over production? So I feel like I just said the same thing like a million times, but
no. I mean, I definitely sort of understand what you mean in your perspective. And as you mentioned previously, the work that you created was in very sort of physical spaces. Yeah. And I'm wondering, because, I mean, of course, in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, we've seen a lot of how visual artists just spread in the digital. And I'm wondering, what are your sort of thoughts on the types of art that have been created in light of this movement and the way that they've been transferred across different digital media and platforms?
It's funny, my friend was talking about this to me today. And I'm very much like, at the heart of my life, Blackness will always be centered in an intersectional approach to Blackness, meaning diasporic, also meaning across gender boundaries. But sustainability and being an eco-critic is also part of my existence. And so I'm also thinking of ways that, due to COVID, even before what else happened, like, how do we reimagine ways that art can be accessible to more groups? Also in the ideas of ableism too. So like, how do you create pieces for vision impaired folks, for hearing impaired folks, for mobility impaired folks? And I think the time that we're living in right now is allowing people to re-engage or reimagine the ways that could exist through digital platforms. And some of the artists that I love that have already been in that space, like Sandra Perry is like one of my favorite artists, hands down, because she incorporates technology with Blackness, also looking at ecology of spaces. And so I think some artists were already there. It's just because of the circumstances, more people are getting pushed to reimagine how their pieces work, engage with people. And I also am trying to think, okay, well, how do I want to reimagine the world that I want to create, especially since dreams to me are almost like, you know, social media, you know, like it is another form of communication. And that's where I want to get into is like, how do you create new technologies of being together, new technologies of togetherness, maybe. I don't know if that actually answered your question. In terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, with Black Lives Matter, I do think, I don't know if so much of the art is responsive because some people were already working on these pieces. So we don't know when it was completed, if it was made in response or if it's being put out right now in response to what's happening. But I definitely do think it's important because what we're experiencing now is exactly what was happening 50 years ago, exactly what was happening 50 years before that. So just responsive art to the moment or socially engaged art as a Black person is fundamental. And how do we create that and make it more accessible? Because if you're only doing it in museums where there's costs associated, where people have to actually physically get there, so transportation, where people don't historically feel safe in those spaces, which was one of the reasons why I actually didn't want to do it in galleries, or like when I first began my project, because I didn't have a budget, so I was like, okay, I paid for it from my own work, my own money, and so, and also not just paying for things, people lent their spaces to me, invited me into their homes, and then I invited other people from the community to these spaces. So how do we democratize art, and how do we create art where more people can have access to it? And I hope that's something that comes out of this, because if we're talking about all types of Black life being seen as important, being seen as precious, how are we making sure that everyone has access to seeing different versions of themselves, which I think art allows you to do. It allows you to reflect on the moment. It also allows you to see representations of yourself. It also allows you to have an emotional and empathetic connection to something aesthetically. And it also carries out a cultural tradition, a Black visual tradition. So I'm just hoping that, I can't really speak for what everyone's doing right now, but it would be interesting to see after COVID happens, like what is the arc of art that's created in relationship to not just Black Lives Matter, but Blackness in general. Yeah, that was a long one. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, no, I love all of your responses. I feel it's just, in talking about art and visual representation and, you know, again, like you said previously, not seeing the Black body as just a sort of Black body, but sort of, because in a lot of ways for little Black girls, you're Black before you're seen as a child, right?
For sure, yeah.
And so sort of taking away the fact that we may have to condition future generations to sort of think very proactively about the way that they're seen before they actually see themselves. And a way to do that is, again, through art, which I, well, just to sort of echo again the question that your friend asked as well, because it's really interesting sort of transferring your art from the physical to the digital. And I wanted to know, again, if you can talk about what your plans are to do that, what you sort of think about the transferal of physical art to digital art to make it more accessible, and in a lot of ways to make it more borderless.
Yeah, because for me, when I think of art and the accessibility of art, it really comes down to who can get to the space, who can be in the space, who can occupy that space. And it's not just in a physical sense, it's in a spiritual sense and an emotional sense.
I see.
If you have historically been, you know, conditioned to not go into a space, you won't. And it's really sad. I've actually working, because I'm also a journalist, I'm an arts writer too. And so I've been doing research on the percentage of Black folks who engage with art in the States. And about, you know, like anywhere from 4 to 10% of Black folks actually go to museums. And I also was thinking of my own life and the fact that, we had books about art. We had mostly books about science and nature because that was my favorite. But I didn't really go to a museum until I was in high school. Like maybe I went on a field trip in middle school, but it wasn't until high school that I really started engaging with art, and it wasn't until my mid-20s that I was really doing it as an act of practice and feeling like I deserved to be there. But then also looking around and saying, oh, I'm the only Black person at this opening. Oh, I'm the only Black person at this space. And it feels weird because this is a Black artist being shown in Seattle. Right. So the demographics, I'm sure it's different in Atlanta. You know, but in Seattle, that is just the reality. And also in Berlin, I've been to openings where I'm like, okay, I'm one of the few, but the artists showing look like me. So like, how do you think about that as an artist? How do you make sure that your people are invited and can afford to be there? Right. I'm really interested in the affordability of Black art, who can afford it, to produce it, and who can afford to partake in it. And so for me, also looking at the intersections of like sustainability in a world where climate change is an impeding issue, like we're not even impeding, it's an urgent issue. And so I'm thinking of, okay, well, how can I lessen my particular carbon footprint in thinking of my own artistic practice? How can I create something that's more accessible? And that's why I'm interested in interacting with the digital. And right now, I don't think I'm at the stage to fully be there. Technology-wise, there's so many artists that I love that are doing work that I'm interested in, and I'm in contact with them, so like stay tuned. Your girl's gonna get up on that coding type of thing, because there are so many like Black Quantum Futures. They're doing amazing work digitally. I know I want to go there. I just need to get there through practice and also through engaging more in that work. So right now, I'm putting a lot of my energy as both an artist and an arts writer in researching this field, so I can work towards getting there and creating work that is both intersectional but also accessible. So like everyone isn't going to have access to a computer. Everyone's not going to have access to different abilities, for instance. But how can I try to make it the most accessible that I can at the moment? And how can I also bring people into spaces that are not historically where you see art? So, for instance, parks or like national parks or like other abandoned buildings or spaces where you wouldn't expect to see the place or to see the work, but you also get to engage with a very different environment. And I feel like being in a natural landscape is important, especially as Black folks, because you don't see us out there as often. You don't see us communing out there as often, and there's histories and there's reasons for that. So how do we, or how can I, as an artist, also use my work as a way to reconnect people to the earth and do that myself? So that would be like the opposite of making it super accessible, because then you have to be able to be in that physical location or whatever. But how can we, as artists, still imagine different ways? Like, can we do carpooling for a bunch of people? Can we work with a school district and get school buses out there? I don't know. Like, just find ways to get the most amount of people who would want to engage with that topic there, with the lowest carbon emissions possible. But yeah, so we'll see with the digital, because I know right now I don't have a skill set to be there. I can collaborate with people who are already there, and that is also where I'm interested in. I think collaboration is beautiful. I think we don't have to know how to do everything. You can just do what you do really well, and then connect with someone who has that offset of skills where you can just come together and create something beautiful. And I think if we're talking about community, like even with the projects I do, it's never just me. It isn't. Even an idea I have is not just mine. I don't own anything I have, really. I'm a vehicle for getting a message out. I'm a witness to the world, and that comes out through my particular languages, which are through writing and through installation works. But yeah, I'm trying to make that more accessible, so we will see. 2020 might be the year because we're all indoors and we can learn things. So we'll be learning coding. We'll see.
Let's do it. And speaking and talking about language as well, right? We're just like, okay. You also mentioned you work as an arts writer. So I wanted to sort of ask a bit about, like, how did you get into arts writing? What are the merits of arts writing for you as an artist? So do you see it as separate, or does your artistic practice inform your writing, or vice versa?
So my arts writing started at a residency called the Black Embodiment Studio.
Okay.
It's part of the University of Washington's Jacob Lawrence Gallery, and it's led by Kimmy, and the last name is leaving me right now. Yeah. Sorry, Kimmy. But basically, it was the first time where a cohort of different writers of different abilities, we weren't all arts writers. I have always been a writer. Like, I actually started in fashion journalism.
Oh, okay.
And so for me, I always wanted to use my words as a way to communicate how I felt or what I wasn't seeing. So I was really interested in communities that were not being put to the forefront, and mostly like queer designers and designers of color. And so when I took this, or got invited to do this residency, I saw it as a way to engage with Black art. The whole part of the residency was, we're going to critically look at Black art as it is shown in Seattle, Washington. We're going to read different Black arts writers and scholars, not all Black, but Black and brown. And it was a way to think of how arts writing could happen outside of whiteness. Okay. Because most arts critics are white men. Yeah. And they're coming from a very particular set of knowledge and skills and a very particular set of discourse, right? It's not accessible at all, really. And so for me, I was interested in how can I create works that my father could read, that my cousin could read, that my aunt could read, that you could read, for instance, to where even if you couldn't go to the show, you could feel like you were in the room. Right. So accessibility was big to me again. And I wanted to create works where it's generative. So it's not about tearing anyone down or critiquing really what happened in a negative way. It's more about what role does this piece play in the global dialogue that's happening at the moment, and what position does this artist have in the community that they exist in, and what potentialities does this give to us as the audience as a way of viewing the world that we interact with every day. So for me, arts writing was a way to actually blend all my worlds together, because I'm really interested in having everything work together. They don't need to be separate. And so I wanted to write about artists who I felt were engaging with community in a very authentic and strong way, and were vulnerable and intimate with their audience. And so I would go to the opening, then I would ask the artist to interview them. We would usually, walk around the installation or the exhibition or whatever. And then we would have like a dinner where either I cooked for them or we ate together, or we would just get drinks. So it was more about building relationships with other artists in my community. And I do that with all my writing. I really go and I meet the person, we get to know each other. I keep up with them. If they have upcoming events, I go, I support. And I'm really interested in writing across lines and across borders. So how do I put artists from Seattle in dialogue with artists in Germany? How do I actually give space to Black artists who usually go underseen, or Black regions, even in the States that go underseen? Because of course, Atlanta, people talk about Atlanta, people talk about Detroit, people talk about Chicago, they talk about New York, they even talk about Florida. But when it comes to Black art, no one talks about Seattle or Portland. And my thing is, it's happening there, and we exist, and we're doing things. And in Seattle, you hear about it. In Portland, you hear about it, but no one else is really knowing what's going on. And so I said, I'm here in Berlin, and I still care about what's happening in Seattle, and I still care about what's happening in Portland. I can use my platform and my voice in order to bring my community to a global lens and a global landscape. And so I predominantly focus on Black queer artists, Black femme artists, but it really, if you're Black, I'm here for you. So if you have a show coming up and you want me to know about it, like, I'm here to support you. I do a lot of research and try to see what shows are going on. And I try to help where I can, knowing that if you're an artist that gets a lot of publicity, I might not write about you, even though I love you, because someone else will write about you. I want to make sure that I am there to support artists, and not just artists, but organizations that do not necessarily have that voice yet, or have that that platform in the arts world. And I don't just stop it there with Black artists. I also focus a lot on Eastern European artists, because I think even within whiteness, Eastern Europeans are not even seen or visible. And I'm mostly focusing on people from the Czech Republic, people from Slovakia, people from Romania, and from Hungary, because I feel like they're still living in very oppressive, like, political regimes, but they're creating art that I feel also engages with a lot of topics that Black artists are doing in the States. So how do I connect them to what's happening, reading their work from Black feminist lens, if it is doing that? If it's not doing that, I don't care to write about it, honestly. If you're not engaging with an intersectional feminism, or you're not engaging with a dismantling of something, I'm not going to write about you. But if you are doing something that has the potential to be a different way of viewing existence that could help Black viewers, I want to write about that. You might have some tools or a way of building solidarity, or a way of, like, politicizing action that we don't do in the States, or we haven't thought about. And we might have something that you haven't thought about yet. So how do we have that cross-pollination? I'm really interested in that, because my partner, he's Hungarian, and our whole relationship has been us cross-pollinating and exchanging, and there's a lot of intersections you wouldn't know. So, you know, they have something that's kind of like cornbread. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. They like the spice. They eat the spices, the paprika. Yes. I was like, oh my God, we can eat together, because, you know, sometimes the girls don't use seasoning. And so for me, it really is, how can I bring the most people around? Like right now, I'm really interested in Roma artists who are using Black feminism as a way to create their own feminist movement. You know? And so that's not what you hear about. You barely hear about Romania.
For sure.
And people have a very limited view of what's going on over there. And of course, like, everyone in that country is not Black Lives Matter, you know? But there are people who are doing that. And there are people who are using Audre Lorde to be liberated, using Angela Davis to be liberated, you know? So why limit that lens? So I'm very much interested in this cross-pollination, these exchanges of ideas across borders. I do that within my art, but I also do it within my writing. It's just one pot. It's a one-pot dish.
No, I definitely agree. There are definitely pockets of these communities, and you can find them everywhere. Like, my mother is Liberian, and there's a large Liberian population in South Korea.
Okay.
You know, who would have thought?
I would have known. I want to meet them.
But your work, but what you said just really resonated with me, because I remember I met Kimberly Crenshaw. I think it was about 8 years ago.
Okay, yes, of course.
Crenshaw.
Hey, Kim.
And a lot of her work, as it relates to sort of Black feminism, is very much intersectional, because she coined intersectionality. She is, and also it reminds me of Hilton Alls, which I'm sure you know. I think this was about 5 or 6 years ago. I had a conversation with Hilton Alls through my former college professor at Mount Holyoke. And it was just really interesting, because the book White Girls is basically a sort of, have you read it? Maybe?
I haven't read it, but I've heard about it.
It's a very good
on
book.
My book list.
Yes, Hilton Alls' White Girls. Yes. A compilation of stories from Hilton Alls and his childhood, his boyhood, as you may call it, and how he sort of frames Black masculinity as a sort of inverted white feminism. And it's just very interesting the way that he sort of takes these different experiences, some which are his, some which are not his, and sort of fuses them together to shed another layer on the types of Black experiences that exist, that we may not know about. But it definitely sort of resonated with me in that way. But yeah, I mean, I think this definitely concludes our conversation.
Thank you.
At least on camera.
Yes.
It was wonderful chatting with you and really learning your insights on art and your artistic practice and the reasons why you do these things and your thought process behind the work that you create. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. VIVA Podcast. And
thank you guys. Have a great day. Keep dreaming.
Deuces.
Stay hydrated.